I never figured I would end up covering a night shift, but that is how life throws curveballs sometimes. I have always been the guy working the day shift at this small, quiet supermarket, a regular, dependable guy doing regular, dependable work. My days were all the same: clock in at 9 a.m., help a steady stream of customers, and head home around 6 p.m. It was easy, predictable. But last night, everything took a strange turn. It was about 8 p.m. when my manager, Linda, called me. Now, Linda has always been a good boss. She is the type who cares about her employees, the kind who would let you switch shifts or take a day off without giving you a hard time. So when I heard the urgency in her voice over the phone, I paid attention. "Joe," she said, her voice sounding tense and a little shaky. "I need a big favor tonight." Right away, I knew something was up. I leaned against the kitchen counter, looking at my half-finished dinner. "Sure, Linda. What is going on?" It is about Mark," she said carefully. Mark was the guy who usually worked the night shift. He was quiet, kept to himself, but he had always been reliable. He has not been answering his phone, and nobody saw him leave this morning. I frowned. "Mark? Are you sure? Maybe he just overslept or forgot to charge his phone." Linda sighed, sounding worn out. "I wish that were it. But I checked the security cameras, Joe. He did not leave the store." My heart skipped a beat. "Wait, what do you mean he did not leave?" She lowered her voice as if someone else might hear. "I mean, he was here when the morning crew came in, but there is no record of him leaving. It is like he just disappeared." That gave me a chill, but I tried to brush it off. "So, you need me to cover his shift tonight?" "Yes, just this one time," she said. "I know it is short notice, but nobody else is available. Please, Joe. I would not ask if it was not important." Her voice had an edge of worry to it that I could not ignore, so I agreed. Linda had always been good to me, and I did not want to let her down. Besides, I figured it would just be one quiet night shift. What was the worst that could happen? "All right, I will do it," I said finally. "But just this once." Linda sounded relieved. "Thank you, Joe. I owe you for this." By 10:30 p.m., I was on my way to the supermarket, trying to mentally prepare for a long, dull night. The store was on the edge of town, tucked away in a quiet residential area, the kind of place that rarely saw much activity after dark. I figured it would be me, alone with my thoughts for most of the night. As I approached the employee entrance, I noticed something unusual. The door, which should have been securely locked, was standing open, swaying in the breeze. A faint creaking sound echoed in the empty lot. And then I saw him, Mark. He was standing just inside the doorway, shivering despite the mild night air. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, and he looked terrified, like he had not slept in days. His skin was pale, and his face was drawn and exhausted. "Mark?" I called out, confused but not yet alarmed. "What are you doing here? Linda has been trying to reach you." He did not answer right away. He just stared at me, then staggered forward, unsteady on his feet. Up close, I could see he was sweating, even though it was cool outside. "Joe," he whispered, his voice rough and weak. Do not work the night shift." I blinked, taken aback by the urgency in his voice. "What? What are you talking about?" "You do not understand," he muttered, running his fingers through his messy hair. "This place, it is different at night. You do not want to be here. Just trust me." I felt a little annoyed, even though I could tell he was upset. Mark had always been kind of odd, but this was over the top. "Look, man, you are clearly worn out. Maybe you need a few days off." He grabbed my arm, and his grip was stronger than I expected. "No. I am serious, Joe. Do not stay." I looked at him, trying to figure out what was going on in his head. "But if you do stay," he added, his eyes darting around, "check the last drawer under the counter. There is something there that might help you. And for heaven's sake, do not leave until 6 a.m. Not a minute earlier, not a minute later." "Mark, listen. I am never coming back," he interrupted, shaking his head. "Not ever." Before I could say anything else, Mark turned and ran off into the darkness, like he was running from a nightmare. I stood there, watching him disappear, trying to wrap my head around his strange warning. His behavior was downright bizarre, but I figured it was probably just from too many sleepless nights. Working nights can mess with a person's head. Still, a part of his warning lingered in my mind, scratching at my thoughts. When I finally stepped inside the store, I found the day shift clerk, Sarah, getting ready to head out. She gave me a tired smile, clearly relieved to see me. She looked like she had been more than ready to clock out. "Hey, Joe," she said with a yawn. "Thanks for taking over tonight." "No problem," I replied, giving a quick glance around. "By the way, did you see Mark earlier? He was acting a little strange." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Mark? No, I haven't seen him." I frowned, a bit puzzled. "What do you mean?" "He was just outside a minute ago, acting all worked up about something." She shook her head, looking genuinely confused. "I didn't see anyone. And I've been here the whole time." A chill ran down my spine, but I shrugged it off, trying not to let it get to me. Weird. Maybe he was just hiding out somewhere. "Maybe," Sarah replied, though she did not seem convinced. She hesitated, biting her lip as if she had more to say. "But what?" I asked, catching the look on her face. "Nothing," she said quickly, grabbing her coat. "Just, do not let it get to you. See you in the morning." And with that, she left, leaving me alone in the quiet store, bathed in the eerie glow of the fluorescent lights. The first few minutes passed by uneventfully. A couple of customers wandered in, picking up some late-night snacks or grabbing a few essentials. I rang up their items, exchanged small talk, and started to settle into what I assumed would be a routine shift. Around 11:30 p.m., everything went completely silent. No more customers, no cars passing by outside. Just me, standing alone in the stillness, accompanied by the low hum of the refrigerators. I relaxed, figuring that maybe the night shift would not be so bad after all. But then, as I sat behind the counter, I noticed something unusual. At the far end of the store, near the dimly lit aisles, there was a figure, someone, maybe a customer. They were just standing there, perfectly still between two shelves, as if waiting for something. "Hello?" I called out, trying to make out who it was. No answer. The figure stayed rooted in place, barely illuminated by the dim lights, casting long shadows down the aisle. I squinted, straining to see if it was an actual person or just a trick of the light. The store was completely quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerators and the soft buzzing of the lights above. "Hello?" I called out again, a little louder this time. Still no answer. The figure remained frozen in place. It was unsettling, but I told myself it was probably just a late-night customer deciding on what to buy. I looked at the security monitor, thinking I might get a better look through the camera. Strangely, the camera feed showed an empty aisle, no one was there, just shelves stocked with products. I frowned and glanced back up, only to feel my heart jump. The figure had moved closer, standing right at the edge of the poorly lit area, still completely still. I checked the monitor again. Nothing. The aisle was empty on the screen, but when I looked up, the figure was there, plain as day. A sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach. Maybe it was just the lighting playing tricks on me, or maybe the figure was somehow in a blind spot on the camera. That had to be it. But when I looked back toward the aisle again, the figure had shifted once more, even closer this time, standing under one of the lights, but shadows seemed to cling to them, like a fog. I could only make out a faint outline, no face, no details. They were standing completely still, just watching. Before I knew it, I was up from the counter, heading over to the aisle to see what was going on. But as soon as I rounded the corner into the aisle, nothing. No one was there. I stood there for a moment, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. The store was empty, there was no one here but me. I walked slowly down each aisle, checking to see if there was anyone hiding, but there was no sign of anyone. Eventually, I went back to the counter, figuring that whoever it was must have left quietly. I checked the cameras once more. All clear. Not a single trace of movement. And then I remembered what Mark had said earlier. The drawer. I hesitated, glancing at the monitor again. Midnight had just passed, and the silence felt even heavier now, pressing down on me. Reluctantly, I opened the last drawer behind the counter, expecting to find some spare keys or old paperwork. Instead, my fingers found a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it, and as I began to read, a shiver crept down my spine. These are the rules you will need to follow to make it through the night shift. I learned them the hard way, so I am passing them on to keep the new clerks safe. If anything strange happens, make sure you write it down. I let out a nervous chuckle, thinking this was some elaborate prank by Mark or one of my coworkers. But I could not shake the memory of Mark's haunted look or the fear in his voice when he told me not to stay. I kept reading. Rule 1, occasionally, you will see a shadowy figure at the far end of the store, just standing between two aisles. It will not approach you unless you ignore it. Always acknowledge it with a nod or a wave, and it will leave you alone. A wave of panic washed over me, and before I knew it, I was shouting, "Very funny, guys. Really mature." My voice echoed through the store, but it felt like the aisles were absorbing it, leaving the air thick and silent. I kept reading. Rule 2, after 2 a.m., something changes in aisle 7. The products will not be where they should be, the air will turn noticeably colder, and you might see things that do not belong there. Sure, I muttered, rolling my eyes. It had to be a prank. But the more I read, the heavier the unease grew. Rule 3, between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., only 5 customers can enter the store. Any customer after the 5th one is not human, even if they look like they are. Count each customer carefully. If a 6th person enters, lock yourself in the back office and stay there until they are gone. I could feel my heart pounding as I read that line. I swallowed hard and forced myself to keep going. Something dark flickered on the edge of the security monitor, a shadow moving past one of the aisles. My heart raced, and I fought the urge to look away. Maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. On the screen, the shadow drifted from one aisle to another, pausing at the far end of the store. It hovered there, unmoving, as if waiting for me to make a move. The air around me felt heavy, pressing in, thick with an unnatural chill. I glanced down at the drawer. The rules. The uneasy, sick feeling in my stomach returned, and I forced myself to pull it open again, unfolding the list with trembling hands. I had only made it halfway through before I'd put it away, but I had to keep reading. Whatever was happening here, these rules seemed to be the only thing that could guide me. I skimmed down to the next rule. Rule 8, if you feel someone watching you from the reflection in the glass, do not turn around. Acknowledge their presence with a nod in the reflection, and then calmly walk to another part of the store. Avoid eye contact with the mirrors for at least 15 minutes. A nervous laugh slipped out of me as I tried to imagine how ridiculous this all seemed. But the sound died in my throat, replaced by the heavy thud of my own heartbeat in my ears. I didn't want to believe it, but every instinct in my body told me that ignoring these rules was the worst thing I could do. Another flicker of movement caught my attention on the monitor. The figure had shifted, drifting closer, now standing near the aisle I'd just been in. Shadows seemed to cling to it, a vaguely human shape blurred and distorted, like a smudge on a camera lens. And yet, it was there. It was real. I tried to breathe, to calm myself, and turned my attention back to the list. Rule 9. If you hear someone whispering your name, do not respond. They know you are here, but they must not know that you hear them. Keep working or pretend to be busy until the whispering stops. I felt another chill run down my spine as if the words on the page were a premonition, waiting to come true. I leaned back against the counter, staring at the empty store and feeling smaller than ever in the midst of the aisles and shelves towering around me. A sudden, faint whisper drifted through the store. My breath caught in my throat. It was coming from the far aisle. The voice was low, almost indistinguishable, a soft hiss that might have just been the hum of the freezers, but no. As I strained to listen, I realized it was calling my name, drawn out slowly, each syllable sending a tremor of fear down my spine. I kept my eyes fixed on the counter, feigning focus, gripping the edge so hard my knuckles turned white. I forced myself to breathe steadily, waiting, hoping the whispering would pass. Finally, it faded, leaving only the store's hum and the faint buzz of the lights. I exhaled shakily, glancing down at the rules one more time. Rule 10, if, at any point, you hear the store phone ring between midnight and 3 a.m., do not answer it. No matter how many times it rings, let it go to voicemail. Answering it will invite something into the store that you cannot control. I jumped as the phone rang, shattering the silence and making my heart race all over again. The sound seemed louder than it should have been, shrill and piercing, echoing off the shelves and amplifying in the stillness of the store. My first instinct was to grab it, to answer, just to silence that terrible sound. But I knew better. The rules had warned me, and so far, they'd been right. I forced myself to stay rooted to the spot, hands clenched into fists as the phone continued to ring, each ring somehow colder than the last. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it stopped, leaving an eerie quiet hanging in the air. I glanced at the clock. 2:40 a.m. 5 minutes until I had to clean aisle 3. As I waited, trying to keep my nerves steady, I noticed the faintest glimmer of movement on the edge of the security monitor. The figure had shifted again, now closer than ever, standing only a few aisles away, shrouded in shadows, watching. My hands shook as I held the paper tightly. 5 more minutes, I told myself. Just 5 more minutes until I had to go to aisle 3. But the minutes felt like hours as I stood there, fighting to keep myself calm, hoping, praying, that I'd make it through the night. Rule 4, no matter what happens, aisle 3 must be cleaned at exactly 2:45 a.m. every night. A spill will appear on the floor out of nowhere, and you must clean it up as soon as you see it. Ignoring it will cause the spill to spread, and soon, you'll notice wet footprints appearing around the store. I chuckled nervously. This was getting ridiculous. Rule 5, if the back door is left unlocked, someone, or something, will enter after midnight. You won't notice them, but you will feel an unsettling chill, as if someone is standing behind you. A chill ran down my spine as I read that line. I instinctively glanced toward the back door, which I'd left unlocked, figuring no one would bother coming through there. We never locked it during the day, so why bother at night? The next rule sent another wave of dread through me. Rule 6, occasionally, you might catch a glimpse of yourself walking the aisles, stocking shelves, or mopping the floors. Whatever you do, do not approach them, and do not let them see you. A sense of unease grew in the pit of my stomach. I tried to laugh it off, but the truth was, this list was starting to get to me. My fingers trembled as I continued reading. Rule 7, if you hear sobbing or cries for help from the manager's office, do not go inside. The door may be ajar. The crying will get louder the closer you get, and if you open the door, it will stop. Something else will be waiting in the silence. I tossed the list back in the drawer, trying to forget about it, when something in the corner of my eye made me freeze. A shadow flickered across the security monitor, near the back door. I had to make sure no one had come in. I hurried toward the back door, expecting to find one of my coworkers sneaking around, trying to scare me. But when I reached the door, no one was there. The air felt unnaturally cold, and a draft blew in from the still open door. I slammed it shut, feeling a shiver crawl up my neck, and locked it. Just as I turned away, a faint knock echoed on the door. Cold sweat broke out on my skin, and I slowly turned back. I opened it, expecting a colleague to jump out and scare me. But there was no one there. The back alley was empty. I stepped outside, glancing around. Nothing. Not a soul. I shut the door and locked it. As I walked back to the counter, my heart skipped a beat. I felt a cold, icy presence behind me, so real, I could almost feel the breath on the back of my neck. I spun around. Nothing but the wall. The chill lingered, creeping up my spine as I stood there, breathing heavily. Rule 5 echoed in my mind. I could feel something watching me. I had to get a grip, shake off the lingering dread clinging to my skin. Standing still behind the counter wasn't helping. The rules were unsettling, sure, but that's all they were, words on paper. I needed to move around, clear my head, and remind myself this was just a quiet, empty store. I decided to do a quick walk through the aisles, maybe restock a few items to keep myself busy. The familiar routine would ground me, keep me from spiraling further into paranoia. As I walked along the aisles, everything seemed normal at first, the rows of snacks, canned goods, and drinks stacked neatly in their places. But as I made my way toward the freezers, something caught my eye. There was an ice cream carton lying on the floor, right in front of the freezer doors. It was still sealed, perfectly intact, but just sitting there, as if someone had dropped it. I frowned. No one had been in this section recently. The few customers I'd had earlier hadn't even gone near the freezers. I bent down to pick it up, telling myself it was nothing. I stood up with the carton in hand, and as I reached out to open the freezer door, something cold and solid wrapped around my wrist. The sensation was all too real, yet there was nothing visible holding me. I yanked my hand back, pulling it toward my chest as I stumbled backward. My eyes darted around the freezer aisle. There was no one here. But I had felt it. Something had grabbed me. Panic surged through me, cold and sharp. I stared at my hand, my skin tingling where the grip had been. Thin red marks traced the outline of where those fingers had been. They were narrow, and there were only 3 distinct markings, like the hand that had grabbed me had only 3 fingers. What the hell? I whispered to myself, but my voice sounded small, almost swallowed by the silence. I rushed back to the counter, my hand still tingling from the icy touch. The thin, red lines on my wrist were still there, burning slightly, as if whatever had touched me had left a mark deeper than just on the surface. When I reached the counter, I leaned against it, breathing heavily, my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling of the cold, thin fingers gripping my wrist. I was still staring at my hand when something shifted in the corner of my vision.